Hello, readers. This is Justin's 52 Books, where I discuss my selections for the 52 Book Club's 2022 Reading Challenge. Every year, the 52 Book Club puts out a reading challenge with 52 prompts or descriptions of books, and it's up to the readers to decide which book they think applies to the reading challenge best. This is week 17, and I am talking about prompt 50, a book with a person of color as the main character. I'd like to think that the need for this prompt and reading challenges in general are due to kind of interrupting the regularly scheduled programming or reading of an individual. Maybe flexing the trying something new muscle. I'd like to believe that. But when I look at the demographics of my 52 selections, I don't know if that's necessarily true for me, or at least for me this year. The way I look at it, I kind of think of the Johnny Cash song Man in Black, where it's always good to have someone up front saying what's right and what needs to happen as a reminder. For where we want to put our money, time, and effort so that we can put it where our mouth is. So I'm always up for a reminder to read books by marginalized authors. Online, you'll find accusations of racism stemming from prompts like this, and I guess that's due to the intentional exclusion of white, probably male authors and protagonists. Hooey. I read plenty of white and male authors and protagonists. The way I look at it is I want the best books possible. The best science fiction, the best nonfiction, the best fiction. I want my romance reader friends to have the best romance books possible. And how will we ever know that we have the best books, the best writing represented if we don't ensure that everyone gets a shot and everyone gets included and everyone gets tried out? And with that in mind, I'll always be up for trying new authors and to read diverse selections. Which brings me to the book for this week, Everfair by Nisi Shawl, written in 2016. And frankly, I don't know if this was the right book for me. First off, the premise. The book centers around the nation of Everfair, which was settled and carved out of the Congolese River area in Central Africa in the late 1800s. Essentially, the book is a history of that nation, taking readers from its founding by Christian missionaries and Fabian Society socialists. And the Fabian Society is a real organization that exists even today. And they team up to provide steam engines technology and later dirigible technology to the indigenous tribes in their war against the colonizers from Belgium. That brings in several instances of steampunk aesthetics and descriptions into the book, which is where like the imagery on the cover comes from. The book follows the nation and principal characters, an African king, a French spy, a Chinese engineer, and many, 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 many others as it navigates its way through several real-life historical perils. Emancipation of the African continent, particularly in this case, the emancipation from Belgium, World War I, and eventually a decolonial movement from within. And I think I must apologize at this point for missing the point of the prompt a little bit. The book doesn't actually have a main character, and thus doesn't exactly fit a main character, a person of color as the main character. It has many, many different characters, but there isn't one. Instead, the book's main character seems to be the nation of Everfair itself. And that's going to have to do given the circumstances. I do wish I had picked a different book for this prompt, as it wasn't my favorite book. I've been trying to figure out why as I prepared my thoughts for this discussion, and I don't think it's because it's a poorly written book or an uninteresting book. It's neither. Instead, I think it just might be me and my approach and my tastes regarding steampunk. I don't think I've ever enjoyed a steampunk book. I keep going back to these things, thinking that there's going to be one that clicks for me, and they always seem to be a miss. And off the top of my head, I've read Bring the Jubilee by Ward Moore, which predates the description of steampunk by a good several decades, but it definitely falls within those parameters of genre. I've also read The Difference Engine just last year by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling, and that was a miss for me as well. And now here's Everfair. And I wonder if it's the aesthetic style that gets me written down and just the sheer amounts of description to accommodate the steampunk descriptions of these worlds that's a problem for me, or if there's something more. Steampunk books, in most cases, are going to have alternate history aspects, and I can think of many examples of alternate history books by authors I adore that were misses for me. Man in the High Castle is not my favorite Philip K. Dick book by a mile. The Baroque Cycle by Neil Stephenson, I've read every other book by him, but I couldn't get through the first one of those doorstops of the Baroque Cycle. Alternate history, and thus steampunk in most cases, are dependent on history, usually, either as a foil to react to, or as a bypass to diverge away from history and then meet back up later on. I think that has an effect in many cases on the way writers manage their motivations of the characters. Suddenly you don't have characters doing things for the sake of themselves or the story or anything that makes sense to the reader other than for the sake of the historical narrative or the bypass or the reaction to. So the historical narrative becomes the alternate historical narrative becomes the main motivator, which bypasses the characters. All that is to say is I didn't care for Everfair that much, and I wanted to figure out why. And I think it's because I didn't care what happened to the characters, and I think it's due to the alternate history nature of this book. It's a fine book. It just didn't click for me, and I think most alternate history doesn't. In any case, I'm glad to have known, and I'm glad to have read it, especially considering it will be re-released as part of the excellent Tor Essentials backlist line here in 2022. Check out those books if you're interested in some great science fiction fantasy, because they are awesome. Thanks for watching me talk about my thoughts on Everfair by Nisi Shawl. This has been week 17 of Justin's 52 Books, and I was talking about Prompt 50, a book with a person of color as a main character. For more information on the prompts of the 52 Book Club, you can check them out on their website, the52bookclub.com. You can check them out on Goodreads and Facebook. You can also check me out on Goodreads and Storygraph at Justin's 52 Books. I hope to see you next week for Prompt 9, a book that sparks joy. And I had to say that I was reading the book for a completely different prompt, but it filled me with such joy that I had to change a couple things up. And I was really excited to share that book with you. Until then, happy reading.